Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the journey of the young Christian man. Today, my guest is Warren Pattison, preacher in the United Methodist Conference. And without further ado, how are you?
I'm doing well, Nick. Thanks. Glad to be on here and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we just get it started with you telling us your life story as a Christian, your testimony, how you got to be where you are right now.
Okay, great. So I don't remember a time when I wasn't surrounded by people of faith. I grew up in the Episcopal Church. I was a cradle Episcopalian, if you will. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, whom I never met, he died shortly before I was born, was a priest in the Episcopal Church. So the Episcopal Church was very important to my family, to my mom especially. And so I grew up in that tradition, which of course comes out of the Anglican tradition, the same tradition that our Methodist Wesleyan faith comes out of. Though I'm a United Methodist now, my mom likes to remind me that John Wesley never left the Anglican Church. So, but I still I cherish those roots. I still have a pretty high theology of baptism and communion, Eucharist. So some people call me the liturgy police, or the little Anglican, because those things really are important to me. And I think coming back to some of what perhaps we've lost in United Methodism related to that is really important to me. But so I grew up, as I said, in the Episcopal Church. Went off to college. There were two Episcopal churches there in town. I went to the University of North Texas, studied music.
Nice.
Neither one of them really connected with me. I just, on the one hand, I'm like, this is the most beautiful liturgy ever written in the English language, that they use in the Anglican Church and in the Episcopal Church, and yet these people are reading it as if it's the most boring thing in the world. And then when we come to singing hymns, it's like, there's the old joke that when Episcopalians get excited, they slow down. So, it's like the hymns were drudgery and the liturgy was like, not exciting. It just really felt dead. And so I kind of stopped going to church for a while, which I think is perhaps a common thing for folks in college. And I actually ended up kind of running into, I stayed in the art storm. So it's where all the musicians and the visual artists and the film students and everybody stayed. So it was really eclectic mix of folks, right?
Sure, yeah.
We had guys with piercings all over the place, and we had people of all different gender expressions and orientations, and which, for the time that I was in college in the early 90s, like that was
out there,
not as common perhaps as it is now. But anyway, so it was a really interesting experience. But I connected with a couple of Christians there in the dorm, and they were from a more like charismatic background, and so we would get together for prayer and Bible study, and I never really felt completely at home with that because it was so different from what I grew up with. But I also appreciated the genuineness of that and the ability to kind of connect with some people in that way. Eventually, I met the person who is now my spouse, Angie. She was studying music as well. She was working on her graduate degree, and she was working part-time as a music director at a local United Methodist church. And so she invited me to come sing in the choir, and I'm like, wow, I must really like this woman if I'm going to get up early on a Sunday morning and go put on a choir robe sit in front of a congregation, So anyway, that was kind of the start of my intentional entry into Methodism. So I also have some background in Methodism in that my both my paternal grandmother and grandfather were very much involved with the United Methodist Church in New Mexico. And so my dad I grew up in that tradition. So in any event, I discovered as I was there and started reading more about John Wesley and what was going on, I was like, man, there's really kind of a kindred spirit here. And, this guy Wesley who said, I'm concerned that, that the people called Methodists would have the form of religion without the power. And I was kind of like, that's what I'm seeing in some of these experiences that that I'm having. And so I started reading more and more about John Wesley, and really kind of, as I said, found a kindred spirit in that. And eventually I joined that church, and started attending there. My wife and I were married in that church. I started a college ministry there, connecting with the campus ministry at the University of North Texas. So we had a college kind of Sunday school class and activity group, and then we started a young couples class. And some of those people are still some of our closest friends, and we're godparents to some of those folks. And I'm older now, and some of those people that were in that young couples class are now grandparents, so it's like, oh my goodness. But anyway, this may be a longer story than you want, but
you're all good, man.
To make a longer story shorter, I was really struggling with where to go for, once I graduated from college. So was I going to go on to graduate school, continue my studies in music? At the time I was playing with a band, doing arts and education work, and doing a lot of things in public schools, and we were on tour for doing our Christmas tour, and we were driving we didn't have a whole lot of places to play, so some of the places were really far apart. So we were in Nebraska, right? So we played a show in Nebraska, and then we were driving to Mississippi. And I had really been struggling with what to do, whether I was going to go to grad school. I was also feeling a call to ministry. I was struggling with, if I am feeling a call to ministry, what tradition do I want to be a part of? Do I want to, do I want to go to seminary, or my grandfather went to seminary in Austin? Do I want to, do I want to go in the Episcopal church? Do I want to go in the Methodist church? And so I was really struggling with that. And finally I decided, I'm feeling called to this. I started working on a church staff while I was playing with the band. But in any event, we're on this tour, and I'm driving from Nebraska to Mississippi. Our band is traveling in 2 vehicles. At the time I was driving our cargo van that had all of our equipment in it and our instruments and all that kind of stuff. And then the other 3 members of the band were in a car that was out in front of us. And this was kind of before people had a lot of cell phones. Like our band leader had a cell phone. But we used to stay in touch with the CB, like to talk to one another as we were on the road, right? And so he had our band leader had just radioed us and said, "Hey, we're going to stop up here. We're going to go to a steakhouse. My treat. We're going to celebrate a little bit for Christmas." I was like, "Okay, that sounds great." So we're driving through St. Louis, and it started to rain, and we started, the overpasses started to freeze, and so I ended up skidding off of whatever an overpass, ended up skidding off of that, and ended up in the middle of like the median here of the interstate. Yeah, so we're all like, the van's on the side, and so the guy that was with me, his name was Johnny. He was our guitar player. Turns out his dad was the pastor at the church where I was confirmed, and what used to be the parsonage became the youth house. And so like I determined, like, I used to have Sunday school class, high school Sunday school class, in what used to be his bedroom. So anyway, it was weird. We're having this conversation. So we sit there, and of course Johnny gets on the CB, because we're like, there's no way we're going to go anywhere because the van's on its side. And so he's trying to, call for help. And so we crawl out the driver's side door, and Johnny's like, "Well, we just passed this overpass. There's a gas station. I'm going to go call Mark," because he had a cell phone. So he was going to go call Mark. And so he started walking back towards that, and another pickup truck hit that same black ice and left the road and hit Johnny. Basically, he died instantly.
Oh my God.
And then the truck was coming for me, and so I started running, like try to run perpendicular to it, and he ended up hitting me and broke my hip, and so anyway, that whole experience was very difficult, but also very transformational for me. So I remember trying to call my wife, and she was in rehearsals for the Christmas program, and couldn't get a hold of her, and so I ended up in the hospital in St. Louis, and one of our bandmates and my friend had just died, and we were it was just a really disorienting time. But through that, what I really discovered in the church that I was working at part-time was this sense of community that I had never really experienced before, and people really rallying around us. So, we didn't have health insurance at the time because we were both working part-time at the church. And this was obviously before the ACA and the requirement to have insurance. And so, one of the attorneys in the congregation stepped up to help me kind of navigate getting insurance to cover my medical bills and all that kind of stuff. And it was a very humbling experience because being fully reliant on other people, and even, my wife had to bathe me. We were married for 4 months at that point. I had a broken hip. I was in a wheelchair. Eventually was able to walk on crutches, but that was hugely transformational for me. And I felt that in that, as I did a lot of reflection and experiencing the power of community within the church, and most of these people were way older than me, right? I mean, Angie and I were among some of the youngest people in that congregation, being in our, mid-20s at the time. I really, at that point, said, I really do feel like I'm being called to ministry. And at that time, I thought it was ordained ministry. I really wanted to, kind of pursue that. So I ended up going to seminary at Texas Christian University, Bright Divinity School. I did not finish my Master of Divinity degree because we ended up moving to Florida before I finished, and I never wrapped that up. But in any event, I'm now a lay person working in the church. I've been working in the church for 28 years, and I've served 3 different churches. Currently serving with Derek Scott. The third is co-lay leader for the conference, and working now as the adult ministries director at First United Methodist Church in Lakeland. So that's a really, really long story about my call. But I think the important thing for me out of that was just the power of Christian community, particularly in a time that was really, really tough. And how that really helped me to feel not only connected to God and to other people, but also to kind of recognize that this really is, I want to be a part of this in a deeper way. So here I am 28 years later.
Absolutely, man. That's wow. What a story. I don't know if Derek had mentioned, but I'm studying music too. So a lot of those things were
awesome.
Yeah. And so you said UNT studying music. I was like, oh, but you're also either the second or third person to have started attending a church because their significant other invited them.
Okay.
So
it's one of those things.
We're seeing that's a common theme among that and like Christian community. So it's funny to see that. But kind of backing up, there, like, I can understand the, like, right now I'm playing at a church in Gainesville every Sunday, and I have grown to enjoy that church and kind of delve deeper into my Christianity. But I would say for about the first 6 months that I was there, it just kind of was like, I'm a musician, I'm here getting paid, and then I'm gonna go home. Ironically enough, my dad's a pastor, so I don't know how you'd feel about me saying that, but that's just kind of where I was at. And I think that's a pretty like universal kind of feeling where sometimes, I see a lot of people on like Ash Wednesdays, they have the cross on their head, and you go, oh, I didn't know you're, Christian or Catholic, and they go, oh, well, I am, or I was kind of brought up that way, but I don't really practice anymore. I think that can happen a lot, and sometimes it does take like a crazy event. We've heard a lot of stories. I think when I interviewed my dad, he said he had a really tough time and was just going through it, and said, all right, I'm gonna turn to faith. And I don't know. I think the goal maybe of this kind of podcast, and I think outreach and ministry in general should be to try to get people there before they have, their, I guess, come to Jesus moment. So it sounds like, were you faithful or were you pursuing your faith actively, or were you kind of attending this church because of your significant other? Where were you at in this time, and how did that affect things?
Yeah, I think when I went to, so I was very active in my church in middle school and high school, and as I said, I really treasured the tradition that I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and the liturgy and the power of that. And so I was really disappointed when I got to college and I couldn't, I kind of lost that. I mean, it's difficult if you grew up in a in a particular church, and then it's hard to find. And I eventually got connected with campus ministry there in North Texas, and it was different than what I had grown up with. But I my faith was still there, but I will say that my focus was definitely more like on the practice room.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's kind of like when you're a music major, and you're doing your academic work, and you're doing all your music theory and doing all those kinds of things. And then like every spare moment you have, you're pretty much in the practice room
or
so,
a concert.
Yeah,
man.
So I didn't have a lot of, I guess I wasn't terribly active in practicing my faith really until I met Angie. And then I started attending Trinity United Methodist there in Denton. But I wasn't necessarily far from it either. I was dating a woman. So as frequently happens, I think I hear this story a lot. I had a high school sweetheart. We wanted to try the long distance relationship thing.
Yep.
So she was pursuing a degree in pharmacy, and I was, going off to music. We were going to different schools, and
that's the dream, man. Marrying somebody
right.
who's going to make a lot of money, and you can just play music.
Right. So anyway, first semester, we broke up. I was devastated. My best friend from high school drove up to Denton to pick me up, and home for me was just south of Houston. And he drove me back, and I was trying to, reconcile things and discovered, that wasn't going to happen. But I was heartbroken. I mean, I was really, it was devastating for me. And then, a month or so later, I connected with another music major there in town. And actually she was another violist. So we were both in the same private studio. We played an orchestra together. And so she and I dated for probably 3 years.
Wow.
And in that time, so she grew up Catholic. And, I wouldn't say that I was pursuing faith a whole lot in that, because it was kind of like, practice room and schoolwork, and then, hanging out with my girlfriend. But we eventually broke up, and it was shortly after that I met Angie. So, and that's when, because she was involved in the church, it was a job really. She was working as, part-time youth director or like quarter-time youth director, quarter-time choir director. So that's where I kind of got engaged, and then kind of found my faith again and really started reading more about Wesley. So there definitely was a time when, I don't want to say that I lost my faith necessarily, but it was not a priority.
Like on the back burner.
Yeah. It's a good way to put it, on the back burner.
I definitely, I can relate to that a lot, especially like music school is such an eclectic place. Like you meet people from everywhere, and it's really neat to see that. But that also means that meet people who aren't practicing their faith, and you become friends with these people, and they don't really want to go to church. They kind of want to go out, and you're like, well, these are my friends. I kind of want to go do fun things with them.
Right.
And so I definitely can relate to that, where it's like you I'm in college. I want to try all these new things. I don't know how I feel about reading my Bible and trying to explore the faith. I want to explore what people are doing in town.
Sure. Yeah.
So how, I guess it sounds like were you trying to resist that temptation?
Well, I wouldn't say that, I never really felt a strong temptation to a lot of things. So there was obviously, I don't know if you know the reputation of Denton, but there's a place called Fry Street right off of campus, and so that's where a lot of the clubs are and that kind of thing. And it was a fun place to go hang out. Like there was a coffee shop that I used to go to with my roommate a lot, and there was a place called the Flying Tomato that was a pizza place, and a lot of people would go there. It was really eclectic, kind of there's a lot of this kind of like really eclectic stuff right off of campus. But it also was a place that was really known for kind of like a drug subculture.
Mm,
So Fry Street kind of had like a, it was a double meaning.
right.
But I never really was tempted or attracted to any of that kind of stuff. But I also wasn't like active in spiritual disciplines either. Like I wasn't reading scripture every day. Prayer was still a part of my life, but it wasn't like a regular daily discipline kind of thing. Oftentimes it was, those prayers like, oh God, I have a recital coming up, please
Yeah.
help me
Please
prepare,
don't need this.
those kind of like foxhole prayers. Right.
In there,
So I wouldn't say that I had completely abandoned my faith, but I also didn't necessarily feel like I think maybe because I had that foundation in my faith and the ethical and moral foundation that comes with that I really didn't find that to be a struggle.
Right.
And there were some of my friends who were into that, and it's like, hey, have fun. I'm gonna go to the practice room or whatever. But it was interesting also being in Bruce Hall, in the dorm where all the arts people were. Like, I actually met for the first time someone, he told me he was pagan. And I was like, oh, okay. So like, does it mean you just don't believe me? He's like, no, I'm pagan. Like I worship like the Norse gods, so like Odin and
wow.
Thor and Freya. And I was like, oh,
yeah.
So like that was totally fascinating to me. Right. So meeting people who not only had, like necessarily different world religion perspectives, or might be agnostic or atheist, because there was certainly a lot of that, but like someone who was actually like, no, I have a like spiritual practice, but it's like,
way different.
This Norse paganism, I was like, wow, that's really, really wild. So it was kind of cool, because there really is this strong sense of spirituality amongst artists and musicians. Sorry, my camera just slipped. Hopefully we'll be able to edit this a little bit.
All good, yeah.
But in any event, there's a strong sense of spirituality, I think, among those more kind of artist types. And though it may not be Christianity, there definitely was a searching for something. And so that was, I also, as an orchestral musician, was more around the musicians who were, how do I want to say this? I don't mean this pejoratively, but they were kind of like the goody goodies, right? I mean, so I wasn't like hanging out with like the jazzers, right? So there's the reputation at North Texas, because it's a big jazz school as well.
Yeah.
Like, okay, the jazzers are the bad guys, right? They're the the bad boys. They're the ones who are like out partying and drinking and
the jocks,
doing all this stuff.
Music school is
yeah. So they're whereas like the orchestra side, the classical side was more like, okay, we're the we're the good people. Not to say that it was all that way, but in any event, that it was certainly around me, but for whatever reason, it just wasn't something that I felt pressure about.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I don't really see UF kind of has a smaller music school, but I don't know. That's interesting to me to see like religion in the context of music school, and such a big one at that. But kind of with that, I because I don't see it that much, it feels weird to find people to talk about religion with. And I don't know if that's the same in other colleges. I mean, I imagine in the College of Theology, that's probably all they talk about. But like, I feel like at this age, when you're like trying to be vulnerable and talk about religion, can be something that's difficult, if not like pretty rare, unless you're in therapy or with close friends. But how would you like navigate that? Was there bandmates I've grown to realize that can be some of your closest friends? Is that like an avenue where you connected, or did you find other places to
I mean, to some extent. So when I started playing with the band, both the band leader and his wife were very active in a very large Assemblies of God church in Dallas. So they actually played as musicians, like they were they had an orchestra there, and so
Oh, wow.
Mark was a percussionist, and Beth was a multi instrumentalist, wind instruments. So anyway, there was definitely a connection there, though I would say our theological perspectives were quite divergent. But I definitely felt that we could talk about faith. So Johnny, who is the guy that I mentioned, who had been playing with the band really since it started, and he and Mark were very, very close friends. He was the one whose father was the rector at the church where I eventually was confirmed. In any event, Johnny was an agnostic, so he never really, even though his father was a pastor, he in his adulthood had kind of moved away from that. So it was interesting. Like that night that we had the accident was really the first night that we had talked about faith the whole time that I'd been in the band. So yeah, bandmates were definitely a part of that. I would say around that time is where I had also started attending Trinity United Methodist, and so certainly Angie was someone that I could talk with about the faith. We had a new pastor that came in, and she was amazing. She was the one who encouraged me to join the church staff part-time, and so definitely had a mentor there. And then our certainly the campus ministry, and then our engagement with our young adult Sunday school class. I mean, those are the people that we really kind of did life with. And we were all kind of exploring what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus. I mean, I guess you continue to do that throughout life, but I mean, at that point, I didn't really have any deep theological training or anything. I was learning, and they were kind of my guinea pigs, so they got to put up with my wacky theological ideas and what I thought were brilliant insights and all those kinds of things.
You're like, by the way, this is then happening.
Yeah. So, but in any event, I think that again, it comes back to community. I think both mentorship and community are the things that are so important. And having a place to be able to at least explore faith, whether it's it may not necessarily even be someone who's a Christian or considers himself a believer, but to be able to ask kind of those deeper philosophical questions and to be able to have those intellectually honest conversations. And then, there can be some real community within that. And then you can say, hey, this has been my experience of my faith. And not to say that it's, evangelism necessarily, but I think it's that kind of mutual exploration that can be really helpful. And the person that you're engaged in that exploration with doesn't necessarily have to be a Christian. I think that there can be some fruit within that. So, and I don't remember his name now, but that guy who was a pagan, really kind of made me go like, oh, okay, well, that's different. And then just talking with him about, well, tell me about like your background and how did you come to that? And what was the deal? And he had grown up as a Christian and decided he didn't want to have anything to do with that and had found this, kind of connection, I think, culturally. Really, for whatever reason, just found the connection to I think to the nature base of that to be really powerful for him. So in any event, that caused me to reflect, okay, well, if I believe in, that God created all things and how is God engaged in the world. And so that prompted some things within me that, it might have been unexpected. That's not something that I would have ever had on my bingo card, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And with like seeing paganism and talking about with somebody about that, or seeing people grow up in Christianity and then depart, do you start to have doubts or like sometimes I think about I don't want to say relationship with God, but like my faith as not a sine wave, but definitely has like higher points and then dips and then times where I'm the mountaintop and then like I'm going through it and it's on the background. So like how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a universal experience. I mean, I certainly experienced that. One of those periods was in college. And part of it was because I just had felt that I was, in hindsight, yeah, faith wasn't necessarily a priority. I didn't completely move away from it, but it definitely was on the back burner. I think that's a really good way to put it. Thank you for that phrase. But yeah, I would say if you're talking about that kind of, sine wave thing, or just recognizing that there are points where you dip, I think a lot of my college experience was that, and then kind of began to come out of that when I, started going to the church, not because I had any deep spiritual reason to do that. It was just like, hey, I really like this. I really like this woman. So
Don't do it.
and then started, and God used that. But that's continued for me throughout my life. And I think that's a universal thing. I mean, there definitely was a time, my wife and I, really struggled to start a family. So we went through infertility for many years. And it was one of those things that, okay, you try one thing in the medical model and okay, that didn't work. So then you move to the next step, you move to the next step. And so it's like the goal line keeps moving, so to speak, because you think, okay, we're going to go a different route once we get to this point. Well, we finally went through, IVF, and that was very expensive. So we're spending tens of thousands of dollars on fertility treatments and going through all of this. And we did. So I remember these dates very specifically because the day that we did the transfer, where they actually take the embryos and transfer them into her womb, that was on the day of the Feast of the Annunciation, right? March 25th. So 9 months before Christmas, right? So I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. So this is when, the angel appears to Mary and says, oh, you're going to have a child. And so
that's awesome.
It's great, And then we found out on Good Friday that we weren't pregnant. And so like those two dates really stick out in my mind. And throughout that whole time, as we were going through infertility, like I didn't want to be in church. I was on staff at Hyde Park United Methodist for a good part of that. And then I had left the staff to go work in the construction industry for a while, partly because I felt like I needed to get out of the church and be engaged in the world. And I'll say going from the church world to construction was like, wow. But anyway, that's perhaps a story for another time. But but I was, it was really hard to sit in church. And I remember one Advent, and the text was about, Mary going to visit Elizabeth, and Elizabeth was said to be barren, and Zechariah had, was in the temple, and that he was, didn't believe when the angel told him that his wife was going to get pregnant, and he was, wasn't able to speak. And so, you're going through all this, and I'm like, what the hell? Virgins and old women are getting pregnant and we can't, and I remember very vividly getting up and walking out of that church service because I was just so heartbroken.
Yeah. It's kind of like where are you?
Just a low time, because I'm like, why is it that you hear these stories in the Bible, and you're like, why isn't this happening for me? So again, to make a longer story short, we eventually, as we were kind of navigating that, I'd gone to work as an audiovisual designer in the construction industry, and then eventually came here to First Lakeland. And my wife and I decided we were going to move into the adoption process and kind of go through that. We had someone who's kind of accompanying us and guiding us through that. And one day we got a call. It was a Wednesday afternoon during vacation Bible school. And they said, hey, we have a situation. Would you like to be presented? So it's kind of like online dating. Before online dating was a thing, like we had created a book, like a profile, and so we send those to the agencies and to lawyers. We were working with a few different people. And then they present them to potential, birth mothers, or those who are going to place their children for adoption. And they kind of like look through the book and decide, okay, this is the person that I want to, parent my child. And so they were asking us, do you want to be, a part of this process? We're going to present her with like 3 or 4 or 5, whatever. And so we said, yeah. And then they called us later that night and said, congratulations, she's selected you, and you need to get on a plane and fly to Salt Lake City. So Thursday we got on a plane, we fly to Salt Lake City, and Friday our son Luke was born. So it was, I went from like being at what was probably the lowest point in my faith to like just being on cloud 9, right?
Yeah.
And seeing God's faithfulness and engagement in that. And I look back on it now, 15 years later, and go, for all of the stuff that we went through, um, not to say that God had a plan and God had this like completely designed and said, okay, on, June 25th, 2010, this is going to happen for them. But I know that God was still present with us, though I did not feel that. I mean, there were times that I really felt that God had abandoned us and had abandoned me. I mean, I was in a place that I was like, have I just been faking this for all of my life? That, that God is not even real, because I just feel completely forgotten. And that's why, for me, part of what I've learned over the last probably 10 years or so is the beauty of the monastic tradition. So particularly Benedictine spirituality. And part of that is that they will pray through the entire Psalter, right? They'll go through all 150 Psalms. Some communities do it in a week. Some communities do it over 2 weeks, but they pray all 150 Psalms. And one of the things that I've learned, I think, in that is just the depth of human experience that is expressed in the Psalms. And of course, as a musician, the Psalms were intended to be sung. And so there's a lot within that. And you kind of go, well, these are pretty good lyrics to songs. And some of them have been adopted to modern worship songs and stuff. But many times, like we pass over kind of those Psalms of lament or the imprecatory Psalms where people are actually angry at God, and not shying away from that within the monastic tradition and saying, yeah, we're going to engage all of this, right? Because this is the whole of human experience. We're not just going to go with those
the happy times,
high parts, right? Like we're going to talk about when life is tough, and we're going to engage in that. And the Psalms are truly an honest place to do that. So that's been something that I found to be really helpful, in engaging with a couple of different communities. So we have 2 Benedictine communities in Central Florida, up in St. Leo. So there's St. Leo Abbey and Monastery of the Holy Name. And then there's a Franciscan Center over in Tampa. And then I got to go to a Trappist monastery back in January, Monastery of the Holy Spirit in Conyers, Georgia. And so all of those communities have kind of been places where they really have helped me to deepen my faith. And a big part of that has been the Psalter.
Yeah, I think that point of acknowledging the rough parts in religion kind of gets overlooked today. Like, especially being on a college campus, you see so many people being like, advertising their campus Christian organization, which you have to, but like you see that and it's like, oh, this is the best place ever, and most welcoming environment, whatever. And then the other people who are proclaiming to be Christians and saying you're going to go to hell if you've ever gone out and partied or smoked or drank or had sex, and you're walking through to get to a class and you're like in this war zone of spirituality. I think it can be kind of jarring, and especially like dissuade people from going to the church. I like a lot of people in the LGBTQ community I know are just like would never think that they can be welcome in a church because of all these people who say nope, God is angry, and we're not. Like they just end up kind of being angry at God because they feel not welcomed. And I think it's okay to be angry at God and to feel these emotions and doubt. And I don't know how that message can get out more. I mean, is that something that you like experienced a lot of or a lack of? Did you notice like when you were kind of coming up through college? Like,
yeah, I mean,
it's okay to have struggles with your faith.
Yeah, again, because I was in the music world, I think there was a lot more it was not uncommon for us to encounter people who were in the LGBTQ community. We didn't have that acronym at that point, but there was a guy who there was a person, I should say, who lived across the hall from me in the dorm, and they adopted the name Queenie. He was out all the time. And just different gender expression. I mean, sometimes it was very masculine, sometimes it was very feminine. And for me, coming from small town Texas, like that was a completely new experience.
Mm-hmm.
And there were people who certainly looked at that, and I think with judgment. And there were, I think, a lot of people in the Christian community who looked at that with judgment. And then I think there were also other people who were like, okay, this person is a child of God, and they were not a person of faith, but still, there's no reason for us to tear them down or to say anything condemning, but just to be loving. I think that part of the challenge of being a young adult and being in college is, and this is true from when I was in college, and I will say that the environment is very different now. I mean, as one who's raising a 15-year-old, I'm like, he's having to navigate things as a 15-year-old that were not even on my radar, or even something that
existed at that point. Yeah,
completely different world, right? So, and no one prepares you for being a parent in that. But I don't know that you're ever prepared to be a parent in any case, but. There is, I think, a tendency, and this isn't unique to college, but we have a tendency to want to present ourselves as better than we really are, right? And
especially in the musician world. Oh my gosh!
Like, oh yeah.
You want to get gigs. You want to be the best.
Right.
You want to be better than everyone else. Like
and the reality of that is that's, I mean, to maybe use part of the language of the 10 Commandments is that really is false witness. And by that, I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I don't mean that in a way of saying, okay, you really screwed up, you've sinned. But what that does is it damages us as individuals, right? Because we are perpetuating an idea of our false self. We're presenting ourselves as different than we really are. And that prevents us from fully experiencing the grace and love of God, who says, I love you as you are, right? Mm-hmm. And that I see you as holy and blameless. We were just looking at Ephesians the other day in my men's Bible study. And, you just think, wow, like, how is it that we can't let go of some of this stuff? I mean, to the point that we will lie to ourselves or lie in the way we present ourselves. And even though it might be, a white lie, or I'm just posting on social media that, oh, look at this, beautiful place that I'm at on Instagram or whatever, and then you kind of see the behind the scenes of people like, this is how they set up the shots for Instagram. And you're like, oh, it's totally fake, right? And don't even get me started on AI and AI generated images, right? But all of that is I think, a perpetuation of the false self, right? That we're somehow trying to present ourselves as other than we are. And so we think that, it's going to be power or prestige or possessions or money or, being the best musician, getting the gigs, like, that those are the things where we're going to find happiness. And what we really need is someone who's going to say, you know what, you need to set that stuff aside. Age does that to some extent. I mean, this is something that I've learned probably in the last 5 years, right? That I've got to let go of this false self in order to experience who I really am. So that really we are born into original goodness, right? A lot of people want to talk about original sin and that we're, that there's total deprivation, but that there really is, that there is goodness. God said in the beginning, and all things that God created, God saw that it was good. God saw that it was very good. And we recognize that, yeah, there's something that's missing. And so, but I have to present myself as being better than I am, right? Or better than I feel about myself. But the irony is like, if we'll just let go of that, then we'd let go of that false presentation of who we are, then we can recognize that God loves us as we are. Yeah. Right. And that's something that, I really haven't learned until the last few years. And it has been honestly through mentorship and and connection and community with other men that I've come to understand that. So to some extent, and I've gone back and forth about this, is that something that young men can experience and understand? I think they can. I don't think it's terribly common, just because
Absolutely.
I think there's life, like you kind of got to go through life and get beat up a little bit, like, to recognize that.
Yeah,
So,
I especially like in a new place around new people, like nobody knows who you are, so you're trying to kind of solidify an identity. You don't want that identity to be like weaker. You want people to know you. You want to be cool. You want to be the best. So for sure, there's not like, oh, God loves me, I'm fine. You're not thinking that. You're like, what can I do? How much more time can I spend practicing so that I can be better, that I can have, more gigs, more people I know. And what would you say to like say, okay, put that aside? Because you can say put that aside, but you're gonna be like, well, no, I want to I want to be the best. I want to do all these things. I think it does take something to realize that some of these things are kind of vain and just like not the main thing.
Sure. Yeah, I say first of all, it's not something you can do on your own, right? I don't think this is a self-will thing. This is not like, okay, I'm going to recognize this on my own, and I'm somehow going to experience healing. There's got to be, I think eldering is really important, and in a way that's kind of a mentoring thing, but I think it's also important for us to be engaged with men who have experienced enough life, and in some ways we experience initiation. So there's been a lot of work. Father Richard Rohr, I don't know if you're familiar with him, the Center for Action and Contemplation, but he's done a lot of work on male spirituality and talking about the importance of initiation, and goes into a lot more detail, much more eloquently than I have, about the true self and the false self. But I think the importance of having older men who can speak into your life and who can challenge you to do reflection about who you are and your experience is really important. So one way that I've experienced that is through an organization called Illumin, ILLUMAN, and that is a group that is based on the work of Father Richard Rohr, and part of their practice is what's called counsel, right? Counsel circles. And so you'll meet with a few other men, oftentimes, maybe 4 or 5. And the idea is that you start with some kind of what I call a third thing. That's not the term that they use, but it might be scripture. It might be a poem. It might be a reading from someone. It doesn't even necessarily have to be from the Christian tradition, but something that has some deep truth in it. And then there are questions, reflections that you have on that. So you begin by checking in with one another. How are you doing? Is there anybody that you want to remember in this time, that you want to dedicate this time to? And the idea is not that we're going to be solving one another's problems, but as we respond to these questions and these prompts, we're sharing who we are, that we're speaking from the heart, that we're listening from the heart, that we are lean of speech, which I'm not modeling here very well, and that we try to be economical in what we have to say, and how we say it, and so that we would be spontaneous. In other words, as we're having conversations, I'm not thinking about how am I going to respond to what this man has said, but in that process, what happens is that we begin to see our common humanity. And I think we begin to see that even though our experiences, our engagement may be different, the way that we relate to whatever it is we're talking about may be different, that there is a deeper truth within that is universal to us all. And in that, particularly with men who've had a little more life experience, man, it's just a powerful a powerful experience. So the practice of counsel is one of those things that I have found to be extremely helpful. And there's a way you can do that online. I mean, if anyone's interested in doing that, you can go to illumin.org, and you can find out more about virtual counsel. They meet on, like, I think it's the second and fourth Saturdays of the month. So you can meet online. It's an hour and a half. And really is a very powerful time. So you begin with the time of of silence, which is not something that men experience in our lives
Yeah.
a whole lot, right? And as musicians, and I
Never
don't want to
something you
speak to you or anyone
experience.
else, right? I mean, it's like if you have any time whatsoever, like I'm always listening to something, or I'm studying something, or I'm doing this, those kinds of things, and music is always kind of running through your head no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so silence is one of those things that I have found to be really, really, really precious. And it's not something that, and you don't have to be a musician. I just think men in general, like, we're not very good at being silent, right? But being silent in community is different than being silent in solitude, right? So that's a whole different dynamic. But so you begin with that, and then we kind of go through and remind ourselves of why we're there, and there's a little bit of a ritual that goes with that, and we read some ground rules, if you will, and then whatever the text of the week or whatever is, and then we kind of break into smaller groups and have the conversations and counsel. And it's really, I wouldn't even call it a conversation, because you're not responding to one another. You're just receiving what one another has to share, which is a very different dynamic than what you experience in life. And yet it's a very, very powerful experience to know that you're being seen by other men, and that you are able to see truth, even though their experience may be very different, that there's kind of a universality or a truth in what other men are sharing, that may be very foreign to your experience, but still is something that has this kind of deeper connection to your life. At least that's been my experience. It's difficult to explain. You kind of have to experience it, but it really is a very powerful thing. And for me, having that, it's almost like a mirror, not because they're reflecting back to you, but you're reflecting to yourself. And as you're speaking, and you're speaking spontaneously, so you're not rehearsing what you're going to say, that it's almost like a stream of consciousness kind of thing. And it allows you, like, you surprise yourself sometimes, being engaged in that. But doing that in the presence of other men, and have other men there to receive that in a way that's very different from the way we would do it in our lives. Because we have a tendency as guys, we want to fix things, right? Like,
absolutely.
That's what we want to do. Someone shares a problem and you're like, I can fix that. Have you tried this? Have you tried this? And this is a very different kind of thing, because they just receive it. And it's not about offering solutions. It's just about being present to one another. So that's been very powerful for me.
Yeah. That's huge. I think, like, especially at this age, trying to find different perspectives and hear different stories is such a huge help. I know that's helped me. I have a couple mentors that I try to stay in pretty active contact with, and just discuss things, asking questions. I think it's pretty common to be afraid to ask questions, or you don't want to seem like stupid or you're kind of, it's vulnerable to ask questions.
Yeah.
But what's I think one kind of, and we can wrap up with this, but one overall method, piece of advice to get that group of young men that can keep each other accountable, that can seek wisdom, that can ask questions, that can put aside the vain, interests of the world.
Sure. Well, I love that you use that word, vulnerable, Nick. And I think that, that's one of the things that as men, we are scared to death of, is vulnerability, because we're afraid, I think, that somehow we're going to be perceived as weak. And perhaps one of the greatest fears that we as men have is that we're going to be perceived as weak in the presence of other men. So first of all, I think gathering with other men, whether you're gathering with other young men or you're gathering with middle-aged or older men, or some combination thereof. I think there's real wisdom in being able to do a multi-generational group, an intergenerational group with that, but it can be done with younger men too. Is to first of all recognize that there is strength in vulnerability, right? Brene Brown tells a story in her book on vulnerability about having a conversation on an airplane with a Marine Corps officer. And she said, wow, that sounds like, I've always admired those who are in the Marine Corps because of your courage and your bravery. And she said, but, it must feel, you've got to feel very vulnerable. I mean, when you're out there in these situations. And his response was something to the effect of, there can be no courage without vulnerability. There can be no strength without vulnerability. And that's a message that is so counter to, I think, what we receive in the world. So finding other guys, right? Even if it's like 2-3 other guys, and just come to an agreement that, hey, we're going to be vulnerable with one another. We're going to have the courage to be vulnerable with one another, that what we say in this space is going to remain in this space. And there's real healing in that. Because if we cannot be our true selves, if we cannot be open, if we cannot be willing to be wounded or to talk about our own wounds, then we're never going to find healing. Right? There's a phrase in Illumin that we use that I love. That's talking about pain, or talking about trauma, or whatever the case may be. We've all experienced that in one way or another, right? And we're not here to compare, my experience with someone else's experience, though that's somewhat human, right? But we're not. We've all experienced pain and trauma. But the phrase is that what we don't transform, we transmit. Right. So when we're talking about pain, we're talking about trauma. If we don't deal with that, which requires a degree of vulnerability, right? And sometimes a great degree of vulnerability. If we don't address that, if we don't transform it, we're going to transmit that into our other relationships. We're going to transmit that pain, that trauma, and inflict that damage on other people in our lives. And so we have to do that work. Right. And we have to do that work in the presence of other men and with other men, and recognize that some of that is the work that we do ourselves, but a lot of that is also what God is doing in us, and through us, and through the other men in our lives. So vulnerability is critically important. And we have to be willing to do that. And that's so hard, man. It's because everything in our culture says that the masculine thing is to be strong, that you've got, there's that macho toxic masculinity out there, that to be successful is to not look weak in any way. Right. And yet on the inside, even though they may say, the Andrew Tate, all those guys in the manosphere who may say, success is
how many Bugattis you
driving
have,
a Lambo, and having a high body count, and having the job, and having money, and having the clothes, and whatever. You kind of wonder, like, they say, oh, I'm happier than I've ever been in my life, and I just, not to be cynical, but I can look at that and go, no, dude, like on the inside, you're grieving, you're sad, you're angry, you don't know what to do with that, because you're presenting this false self, and you can't get to who you really are. Know that you are beloved above all things, apart from all this other stuff. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, man. That's I think huge, and like the perfect way to kind of encapsulate all that, like, because that's kind of what you're surrounded, like, I don't know, at UF I feel like there's a lot of people who maybe aspire, or who kind of come from wealth already, and aspire to get that, like, I'm gonna be the coolest guy at the party, and like, and you lose the real, like, what's the real point of it. So I think that's perfect. And with that, Do you want to close this in prayer?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Nick, thanks for this conversation, man. I'm
Absolutely. Thank you.
really glad that we were able to do this. So yeah, let's pray. Almighty and gracious God, we are grateful for this opportunity to be engaged in conversation, to be able to share from our hearts. And God, I pray for all of those who will be hearing our words, that that through us, that you will speak to them, not because of clever or creative or impressive things that we've said, but just that we're able to be a channel of your grace, that you would flow into the lives of all those who receive this. God, I thank you for Nick and for his engagement in these conversations. And God, above all, may we know that we are beloved, that we are treasured, that we are your children, and that vulnerability is strength. In your precious and holy name we pray. Amen.
Well, thank you guys for watching, and thank you again, Warren, for being on. And we'll see you guys next time.